Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody is enjoying his day so far. I know there is a lot of sessions and people are actually hopping from one Zoom to another Zoom to enjoy the lovely discussions we have at the moment. This is your host, Samer Adi, and I will be with our great panel today to speak about cloud security and what we could learn from security breaches at the cloud. So today I have with me Sandra, I have Michael, and I have Nabil, who they will share their experiences with us and educate us about their vision and their plans to go to the cloud and to handle the cloud. I will start with Sandra, if possible. Introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sandra Liepkalns. I'm the VP of Information Security for Choice Properties REIT. I have over 25 years of experience in information security, attack and penetration testing, DevSecOps, and I traded digital properties for physical properties in the last year.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, Michael Ball. So I've 30 years experience in cybersecurity, working for a number of large corporations, insurance, banking, that sort of thing. The last 5 years, I've stood up a practice as a virtual CISO, looking after supply chain and smaller businesses.
Thank you. And Nabil Zoldjalali from our partners.
Absolutely. My name is Nabil. I'm with Darktrace. Darktrace is a world leader in cyber AI. I predominantly focus on our cloud and SaaS practice. I'm a director of cloud security. Before actually taking up this role, I actually started kind of setting up our business across Canada. So it's been a really exciting 4 or 5 years for us, and really happy to kind of share my perspectives from a AI and machine learning based approach.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I think that the question everybody in the security domain and some folks from the technology domains or infrastructure domain, usually they will ask themselves is, do I go to the cloud for certain services? Is the cloud secure for me or not? Should I stay on-prem and be sure that I have a full control on my environment? And there is too many other questions that it's in mind, but sometimes we need to be in a place where some of the smart people like the panel we have today that can give us their experience about the cloud journey and their ideas about the security in the cloud. So Sandra, I can start with you and ask you the question about with the technology advancement we see now in the market and the big leap all the service providers in the cloud domain are doing. Do you see yourself now or the market now in a place where the IT on-prem become more of a commodity that could be outsourced without too much questions around it?
Well, we've employed a cloud-first strategy and have had that for several years. And prior to joining Choice, I was also at Loyalty One, where we had a cloud-first strategy as well. So, coming from that environment, I think, more and more organizations are adopting the cloud. But if you take a look, when you have a whole slew of legacy systems, it's far more difficult to actually try to move to the cloud. But there are certain components that you can. In the past, we've talked about outsourcing things like help desk as commodity items. We've got Office 365, we have communications platforms, collaboration tools. Multi-factor is cloud-based. Almost everything that we're looking at can be a cloud solution today. But I think one of the things that may not change is the integration components. We still need the IP in-house to understand how to integrate these solutions, because it relies highly on infrastructure integration. There's still a whole slew of people who don't understand how DNS works. And, having that understanding of the infrastructure integration, the security components is actually critical in moving to the cloud, as well as the integration of your business applications. You think back a couple of years ago, people were building their own API gateways. They're building their own APIs. Today, you can have that as a service. But again, it's from a security architecture integration component. Those are the most critical aspects, as well as the compliance and ensuring that, you have the appropriate vendor vendor onboarding controls in place, risk management. And the one thing we can't forget, and people often do, is that you can't transfer the risk. So if there is a security breach, and your data has been breached, it's still your responsibility. So
actually,
that's kind of my view on it.
Yeah, I like the concept of you cannot transfer the risk, because actually I has been in many conversations where the people will think that it is now a cloud, it's their responsibility, it's not me anymore. I cannot be responsible for that. And this is actually a good segue for my question to Michael about, do you think now at this stage the cloud can provide you with the same security controls you have on-prem? So
the operative word there is can. So absolutely. I mean, if you look at the large cloud providers right now, so SaaS aside for a second, if you look at AWS, Azure, Google, DigitalOcean, they have marketplaces for tooling and health checks and all the things that would make an appropriate secure infrastructure. It's our job to do that due diligence, to actually put them in place and actually use them. That makes sense?
Definitely makes sense, actually, yes. And again, it's so do you think it's a user perspective configuration part of those controls in the cloud, or those will usually come by default with the service you buy?
Yeah, and so I'm going to say, for example, okay, everybody knows Office 365. Everybody, it's a prevalent infrastructure service that we all get for our mail and Office and such. Out of the box, if you were to install this in your organization out of the box and do nothing else but provide mail to your clients, under their own security health check, you get about a 2 out of 10, 20%. That's a fail. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a whole bunch of other things that you need to do to raise the level of security. They provide them. Okay. They give you guidance on them, but out of the box, they make it so that it's easy to install, easy to disseminate to your employees and bring it up and get it going. Okay. Then you have to actually do the configurations that they recommend.
Awesome. So at the end of the day, it is still your responsibility from a security perspective.
Always your responsibility to own the security.
Okay, fantastic. So I think, Nabil, both Sandra and Michael agreed that it is the service provider. It's what I have in the cloud to protect me. So from your perspective as a vendor for a security practice, do you think like having policies is enough actually to detect all threat vectors in the SaaS environment?
That's actually a really good question. And I actually wanted to tie a little bit of what Michael and Sandra said together, because I think they're actually incredibly coherent in the sense that, these SaaS providers, they make the usage of their apps so insanely easy. I mean, they really go to the next level to make it as smooth and easy to transition and to use their services out of the box. And one thing I've noticed is that lack of control you get in terms of not having the servers in your own data center with physical access to the cables and all of that, that lack of control does not translate to a lack of responsibility, right? So as Michael just said, it feels so easy and so kind of wonderful to use, but oftentimes you can conflate that or forget the fact that, it's still entirely in your ball court. And if you actually look through all the terms and conditions, you'll almost be surprised at some of the things that you might find in there. From an actual security perspective, I think, a lot of times having security controls that are good for right now today, they're not that challenging to come up with. But what I find the real challenges, especially with policies, is it's increasingly difficult to predict what tomorrow is going to look like. Mm-hmm. And I think as a security industry as a whole, we've seen this kind of time and time again with, all these kind of headline making attacks where it was either something no one ever thought of before, or trying to solve for a specific case doesn't have an exact policy that everyone can just plug into their list of policies and say, okay, now I'm safe from this kind of attack. So from that perspective, I think it's an absolute necessary first step. And I think, having, strong policy and identity management will get in the way of 80-90% of the very kind of common bad that you see out there. But I don't think it's necessarily sufficient to secure you from, things such as insider threat or 0 days or misconfigurations that might even end up on the SaaS provider's end of the house. where if you don't have, a proper use case or playbook set aside around that, you'd never be able to detect and move fast enough, especially with things like SaaS, where an account takeover can happen within seconds. They can pull data within minutes. And, from the time that, the security analyst logs into their laptop, pulls up the logs, tries to figure out what happened, it's all said and done, right? So I definitely think there's a little bit more to the security game, especially when it comes to SaaS, than just having a policy-based security approach.
Okay, excellent. So Sandra, if I can come back to your first question, actually, and you mentioned in your answer that you as an organization should own the IP and your team should be able to manage both environments. So now, if we are in a place where you have a hybrid IT environment mixed of on-prem, on cloud, how you manage actually the segmentation between those two environments, and how you manage also the authentication between those environments?
Well, from an authentication perspective, it's having a strategy in place how you're actually going to be dealing with that. The focus today is really having a zero trust environment and creating the mechanisms in place. So you have the ability, we've all been working from home since March. Everything, this is really top of mind for everybody, is how do you integrate the platforms? How do you authenticate? Having the federation, multi-factor sign-on, how do you actually manage all of these things? The biggest challenge, I think, with COVID was that everybody on the turn of a dime, somewhere around the 15th of March, ended up working from home. And everybody, whether it was a small or large organization, kept their fingers crossed whether or not their VPN structures would actually work. And so, the whole idea of people utilizing their data centers to get to other applications actually creates a lot of risk to an organization. So, it's thinking outside of that box, creating that glass box environment, setting up the VDI environments where you don't actually need to have people come into your data centers or into your private containers, or only access. That's really the key thing, is only giving access to what is needed for the specific purpose of that user and what they need to have access to. So it really, again, it goes back to, it's not just the authentication mechanism, it's the entire architecture and design and the integration and the data flow of the components. So my background is infrastructure. So I really look at it from that perspective, as well as from a data flow. How is the data flowing from one piece to another piece? Also from a multi-layer security perspective, how many layers do you have in place to be able to prevent, the crossing of information? Gone are the days, and hopefully in most cases, where people have a flat network. Hopefully things are segmented, that, the most valuable assets in your organization are buried somewhere deep in a data center or in a cloud environment, but have those layers surrounding them. So yes, the segmentation is critical. Whether it's, single sign-on, but, having the multi-factor authentication is critical as well. And, when you talk about hybrid IT, I still go back to first principles, which a lot of people forget today, is, what are your access controls? What are your privileged accounts? All of that management. Those are some of the most critical things. Again, the architectural design, the integration of the components, how users are actually using systems and really understand what they're doing. So that's the way I look at, that's my perspective of the technology, whether it's hybrid, whether it's, all cloud. It's really, how is it integrated, and what are the controls from an integration perspective?
Yeah, actually, you listed all. Like, I don't think anybody will be able to top that answer. Like, I was trying to write some ideas myself,
Right.
but you are bang on in this one. So Michael, and from your position, and you are part of Team CISOs, and you do a lot of things with your clients. So before you move to the cloud, usually, I'm sure you did some security assessments. So from your perspective, what type of security assessment you will do, or what's entailed in those security assessment? And from a client to a client to a client, definitely you learn something every time. So what different you will do if you are have been asked to do this again and again?
Right. I will admit that a number of my clients try to do a lift and shift when they've got infrastructure on-prem and they they've been given the opportunity to move to the cloud. They will take the architecture that they are familiar with and comfortable with and try to shoehorn it into a cloud service. And generally that just doesn't work. Okay. So when they're asking me to come in and do an architectural assessment, and I do a lot of these, we start right there is no, what is it that you're trying to build? What is the purpose of the end product? Okay. And how do we work backwards from that, given the services that are now available in the cloud, which are much more mature than what we would have on-prem? Things like containerization and better management of logs, better management of identity. All of these things are opportunities that we didn't have from our legacy systems on-prem. So, we basically start from that is understanding what it is they're trying to build and then architecting it around the capabilities in both the cloud provider and their marketplace.
Okay, awesome. So Nabil, from your experience now as a vendor for security product, again, we have seen security attacks on-prem environments, and also we have seen security attacks on cloud-based environments. So from your perspective, what differences you see from attack vector differs between on-prem attacks and or the cloud-based attacks?
I think in terms of the attacks themselves and the things that happen, fundamentally speaking, it's usually the same types of motives that will drive attackers one way or another, right? But in terms of differences, I think there's a few kind of fundamental differences in terms of how an attack looks and feels that are really important to consider when you're actually looking at securing, your cloud infrastructure, your cloud, software compared to what you have on-prem. And to explain this a little further, I'd give you a really easy example. If you actually look at a well thought out ransomware attack on someone's organization, right, you're going to have something that will follow multiple steps of the kill chain, and it'll include things like, it might start with a vector coming in through email. It'll have a piece of software. It'll do some reconnaissance. It'll try to figure out where it needs to move. It might then do, lateral RPC or RCE binds and get to kind of where it needs to get to. It'll reach out to command and control infrastructure. It'll get a list of instructions. And by the time it actually gets to where it needs and effectively starts to encrypt files, the process start to finish, right, if it's really elaborately designed, will take somewhere in the neighborhood of weeks, if not months. And depending on kind of what threat reports you read, some of them are north of 100 days, some of them are north of 200 days, but it's somewhere in that range, right? Now, if you compare this with what can happen similarly in the cloud, right? The actual access to infrastructure and the ability to scale up or down whatever you want at whatever scale and speed you want really changes the way the attack moves. And I actually saw an example of this a few months ago with a customer where they had someone doing software development testing internally. They didn't want to authenticate every time they ran their tests. So they actually hard-coded their access key and secret key ID into their test software, but it was local. So they thought, no problems. Like no one's going to know. I'm totally safe, right? And then they do a GitHub commit and they forget that the keys were in the software. And within 20 seconds, someone from the other side of the globe logs in and auto scales a fleet of 60 instances to mine cryptocurrency. So the time scale now has gone from hundreds or 100 plus days to under a minute. And from that perspective, I think, it poses a really interesting challenge, which is when it comes to cloud security, it definitely on one end, there's a understood notion that preventative measures are incredibly important, right? But it also kind of shines a pretty bright light on the fact that detection isn't enough. Like if you have something that start to finish is going to happen in less than a minute, it's not simply enough just to be able to detect it, because you could almost bet that human reaction will be too slow to catch up. And at that point, it really becomes an interesting thought process and discussion around the importance of response, and not just any old type of response, but actually being able to respond at machine speed autonomously, which is what's going to allow you to get in front of something that moves at that speed and scale.
Yeah, actually, so Nabil, you remind me about back in the days when people was buying IDSs, and everybody is happy that, oh, I have IDS. Okay, you have IDS. It will detect a threat coming towards you, but what the IDS will do, and like, oh, really? Yeah. So then we move to IPS, and then people start thinking about, okay, now we have a step in the right direction. So exactly what you mentioned, it's not only detection, it's also you need to find a way to prevent those attacks coming into your organization. So Sandra, if you allow me to go back again, I will keep using your answers to generate questions in that one. So you said back, like everybody's working from home since almost March, based on what's your situation or province, early March, end of March. But do you think that this situation, people working from home, forced more companies to go to the cloud and start looking at services from the cloud that quickly will allow their workforce to work from any place at home? You mentioned VPN, and I was in a place where we have 3,000 employees and our VPN license was only for 50. So the decision was, everybody go home, you will VPN. I was like, okay, you cannot do that. So do you think cloud era actually accelerate the move to the cloud, and COVID era accelerate the move to the cloud and the services from the cloud?
Well, actually, I think COVID has accelerated technology 2 to 3 years ahead in a lot of areas, particularly when it comes to digital and digital product space. People's roadmaps, what they're doing today was on their roadmaps, 2 years out. You think about the communications platforms, whether it's GoToMeeting, Zoom, Teams, having soft IP phones because your internal phone system, you have to log into, you have to VPN in to be able to get access to it. There are so many things that are people reevaluated during this time, and also bought new services because they didn't have them or they weren't capable of being able to support the magnitude of people working from home. I think at one point there were some stats back in March, April timeframe that 260 million people were on the internet at the same time. They're working from home, and students, and sorry, my data may be out of date at this point, but it's a huge number of people. So cloud services, we've seen the latency in the internet, and if you think about any of the collaboration software, basically we set our meetings to be either at quarter of the hour or a quarter after the hour, because you couldn't get on. You couldn't. And so technology companies themselves also have had to scale up to be able to support the amount of users that are going to the cloud. And those are the ones that come to mind very, very quickly, as the collaboration aspects of it, but also VPN. People had to ramp up their VPN technologies. And depending on where you were or are from a infrastructure perspective, re-architecting, putting in next-gen firewalls, looking at the zero trust, all of those aspects have been hugely accelerated, hugely at this point in time.
Yep. And
people trying to, because I think yesterday was announced that there's going to be Pfizer announced from a vaccine perspective that the trials are going really well, 90% effectiveness, but we're still looking at spring when vaccines may be available. So we're going to be working from home for a long time still. It's at least another 6 months, possibly longer. But then also the way we work today has shifted. And organizations who didn't have work from home have now adopted that. Well, we've been forced to, but people are asking to be able to even continue working from home. And so looking at how we're going to balance and having the hybrid technologies in place to be able to support all of the things that we do. And so, yeah, it's moved really, really fast. I know for ourselves, also for IT groups, you're not going into work, you're at home, you don't have the commute time, and people are online and they're working, and they've accelerated their projects significantly over the past 10 months.
I don't want to derail the conversation, but do you think this is will be healthy for the people in IT on the longer run? Like I know myself, usually you go to the office, you finish at certain time, you tell people that I want to catch my train and you leave. Now there is no train to catch. Like we are, as you said, we are logged in from 8 to 8, 9, 10.
Yep.
So for how long we will keep be able to do that, Sandra? I don't know.
Well, I look at it from this perspective. I know from myself is that, I try to go to the office once a week, and actually my family forces me, my daughter and husband, and say, from a mental health perspective, I come home a lot happier because, and we've had volunteering, and it's really that human interaction. Just saying hi to people that you haven't seen for a while. My team and I talk every single day, but it's not the same as just having those casual conversations or, going out for a walk to grab something to eat or a coffee. And I think the mental health aspect is very, very important. Going forward, I think, we're going to be looking at collaborative spaces, and more organizations are looking at it from a collaboration perspective. We may be working from home, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, but come in, collaborate, get that brainstorming so you have that human interaction. And I think that's what people are really trying to gear up for. And I know a lot of the large organizations, they're reevaluating how they use their office space.
Awesome.
So there's a lot of change and a lot of things, whether it's the technology, whether it's the people, whether it's how we work, where we work, those things are changing and evolving. But I think we'll be in a better place. Life balance once we get over all of this. Because it is nice not to have to get up.
Yes, definitely.
At 5 a.m. to go to the office.
I agree with you 100%. And yes, definitely going to the office once a week or whatever is much actually will help people much more than sitting in the office every day at home and then do your business. So Michael, for you to answer the same question from your perspective, like how you see COVID accelerate actually people start looking at cloud services, at security in the cloud, because now, as you said, people, they are not in the office, they are not wired into my network, they are on a Wi-Fi somewhere. Yep. Even if it is at home, this is a secure environment. I don't know if they have I would say a neighbor who is a techie and be able to hack and do certain things on the Wi-Fi. I don't wanna be in that position. So from a security perspective, COVID accelerate the move to the cloud, but is it the same rate for you from a security space also?
Right. So you've touched on two different things. So first of all, I'm going to say, again, my clients are all small businesses. They did not have the infrastructure in place to facilitate large VPN backhauls into their office. So that right from day one was a non-starter. So they had to go to the cloud. Okay. Part of the problem that we found though was and a couple of my clients are in your space, Sandra, and so they sent their call centers and everybody home, and then they realized that they didn't have to come back to the office, that the traffic didn't have to come back to the office, that the things they were doing day in and day out was Microsoft Office, connection to the internet, email, Salesforce, Concur, Workday, tools that were already SaaS based. And so now we've sent them all home. We didn't set up their laptops to be appropriately managed from a patch management and endpoint protection, whatever. And now we've lost those devices. So literally we had to spend some time reaching back out to our employees and saying, can you please bring that machine back in? We have to do something to it so that we could gain access again and start monitoring and managing and, you know.
Good. So Nabil, from your perspective, like you hear Michael talking about acceleration to the cloud, and Sandra did the same thing with the services. So from your perspective as Darktrace, do you see now do you see unusual type of attacks or threats start emerging because people are working from remote, not from the office anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was one stat that I came across, I think it was in late April, early May, that there was over 160,000 COVID-related domains registered since March, right? And one thing that we were saying and kind of reporting a lot on at the time was just the sheer volume of phishing emails that were just purely related to like either COVID or CDC information or what have you. But I think, you know, like it really, really, you know, loudly portrayed how opportunistic attackers are. Like it was to, I think, a level and extent that, you know, I would not expect or think of. And I know there were actually a number of kind of hacker groups that came out and said, well, you know what, we're actually not going to go after certain, you know, medical facilities or institutions or whatever. But I still find at the end of the day, you know, you look at this and, you know, it's been transformative in every sense of the word, right? It's challenged the way people think about business. It's challenged the way people actually run their organizations. And I think there's one point, Sandra, you brought up that I find so important and timely is the importance of integration and, you know, proper planning is something that I think it's really highlighted. And I remember one of the early conversations I had was with a very, you know, SaaS heavy customer of Darktrace's. And I remember their director of security was telling me that, you know, it's an absolute nightmare because they were using all these services, but they didn't have the right level of subscription to actually enforce two-factor authentication. And it was like the most simple thing. And for the longest time, you know, management kept saying, no need, no need, no need. Now, all of a sudden, you know, within an aspect of, you know, a few weeks and months, there's a massive need, but now they need to standardize. So now they have to go through all these processes and all this planning that they didn't have put in place before, and they didn't know actually what to do about. And it is painstakingly to kind of go back after the fact and try to, you know, really quickly do it, because it really starts to induce mistakes. Like when you're forced to do something under extreme time pressure, right? Human error will show up somewhere. And I think to that end, something that's becoming very kind of commonplace as well is you have SaaS seats and licenses flying off the shelves. And as Michael mentioned, you know, people aren't necessarily always taking the time and diligence to properly have it configured with all the right security controls. And attackers know this, right? So it's one of those things where you kind of see they kind of go after the same type and the same kind of themes over and over again. And everything we use from an end customer perspective, whether it's the cloud for scale or speed or efficiency, attackers are also using the cloud for their scale and their speed and their efficiency, right? So I think there's a very, very interesting kind of reflective nature there.
Okay, good. So, Michael, if I want to go back to you and ask you about, now we have services in the cloud, we have a service provider, we have you as an entity, as a consumer for those services, but also you have your users who they sit at home to do their daily 1, 2, 3 activities.
Right.
So between the three of you guys, service provider, you as an entity, and the user, who you will think is responsible for the security of the cloud?
Right. So it's my corporation's data. Okay. So I own the responsibility and accountability for the protection of that data. The SaaS provider basically is providing us a service. So you know, we need to be accountable to make sure that the appropriate provisions are in place. There actually are, you can Google it, there are cloud security responsibility matrices out there that tell you, you know, so whether you're getting infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, you know, the level of responsibility that you yourself as the company should take. And really and truly, platform and infrastructure, right down to patching, you are responsible for, you know. At the SaaS level, it's your data. You need to make sure that the contract between you and the SaaS provider dictates how that data is secured and the levels of encryption and who owns the keys. So a conversation I had a little while ago in and around key management. So even though we're in Canada, United States Department of Homeland Defense has the authority to grab data from Microsoft, from Google, whatever. Okay, based on their understanding of a threat. Okay, if you allow Microsoft to hold those keys, those API keys, those encryption keys, then they're going to hand them over as well. You as the company need to own those encryption keys. You need to secure them, put them somewhere, and all of the data that you own, SaaS or otherwise, you need to own those keys and own that encryption so that when the data does get handed over, and it will, it's not readable.
I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of, as you said, time. It's not a matter of it will or not. Like we are all confident that at a certain time, somebody will come to those big cloud providers and ask for a chunk of the data for any reason that they make it they make it sound right. So Sandra, from your perspective, do you really trust the users and the user judgment and follow the security protocols you have in place? I see everybody is smiling. I don't want to say laughing, but smiling.
Path of least resistance.
Well, you know what I will say is that security is a journey, and we've made it a priority, or I've made it a priority in every organization that I've worked with to basically raise the security consciousness level of the organization. We're all human, we all make errors, but it's providing the appropriate level of awareness material. I also look at it from the perspective, if you make it personal, it sticks. Our business lives and our personal lives are so intertwined today that if you make it personal, if you make it about family, about children, about elders, it's about securing all of your information, whether business or personal, training everybody to understand. And so, everyone says people are our first line of defense, and they are, but people are also human. So the thing is to do your best in educating them, making them aware, providing them the tools, providing training, education. We just came off of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And, I think I really like their theme. And that's one of the things, we built upon last October. In October was, we're all responsible to secure our piece of cyberspace. And it's a shared model, whether it's from a business perspective, whether it's a personal, whether you're putting things up on social media, but we have to realize that people are going to click on things will happen. We have to be able to respond to them, to have the resiliency in our systems, to have the business continuity, to have the plans for ransomware, to make sure we have the technology components in place to be able to recover from those as well.
Right.
Even though when you know that your uncle is still alive and you receive an email that he passed away and he left you $50 million somewhere, you click that maybe he died and I get the money anyhow. Nabil,
I think those ones are, kind of old school.
It's not.
They still do float around.
Yep.
The emails that we're seeing are actually far, far more sophisticated.
Yeah. That
you really have to examine them and look 2-3 times to go, is this real or not?
Yeah, but keep in mind, those are sophisticated, targeted attacks, like against the CEO, the CFO, the people who have the power. But the inheritance piece of email, it comes to everybody.
Yes.
Even though you see it in your junk folder and you trust Microsoft or Google or whoever provide you with the email service that mark it as a junk, but you still have I need to click that and see if it is going with it to happen or not. Okay, no further comments on that piece. Nabil, coming back to you from a technology perspective, do you think we will be in a place where we will have a technology that it is user-proof? Meaning, now, if you want to go to any password policy configured somewhere in a correct way, and you try to put a weak password, the system will say, this is a weak password, doesn't meet the requirements. You need to have it complex, you need to have it 20 digits, whatever the number. But with other systems or other platforms, i.e. emails, can we be in a place where whatever the user tried to do, if it is not secure enough or not safe enough, the platform will not allow them to do it?
That's a really good question you actually bring up. I find that, a lot of times when you actually look at security, I remember, 5-6 years ago, I used to think of it a lot as, the way magicians work, right? An attacker comes in, they perform some kind of attack on some kind of compromise. And, a lot of times people kind of are up in arms and they say, oh, we didn't know this, we didn't expect it, it's doing this thing we've never seen before. And it kind of almost seems like voodoo until you kind of understand exactly how they did it and how it worked. And all of a sudden it's obvious and everyone can update their, active lists and their policies. And all of a sudden, it's out in the known, and that magic trick doesn't work as well anymore, right? I think from that perspective, the notion that, we'll have one single tool that will conquer them all and be the kind of silver bullet, I find that to be quite difficult to swallow in practice. There's just so much that can go wrong. And at the end of the day, if someone really wants to do something, they'll find a way to do it. One thing that I have noticed, and I think this is something that, Darktrace is heavily invested in, is the fact that a lot of really interesting finds require a new approach to detection. And from that perspective, I know something that has been kind of front and center for Darktrace is heavy reliance on unsupervised machine learning, not to essentially tell our software what to look for, but to tell it, learn what the business is doing and find things that don't belong and don't fit. And I think that approach has allowed us to kind of take a really necessary step forward, not just in terms of being able to catch things that oftentimes go missed, but I also think, from a response perspective, Sandra, you're talking about, the IPS of old and how it really wasn't a great user journey because it would break down processes, it would slow down business, and ultimately no one trusted the IPS vendors one bit. And I think, similarly, on the same vein, when you want to actually respond to something, right? That response needs to be surgical. It needs to be proportionate. But most importantly, I feel like whenever you're trying to respond against an attack, you don't know what it looks like. You have to be able to essentially have a safeguard. And I know something that we've been able to do with our approach is be able to enforce normal. So without necessarily knowing what kind of attack we're going to expect, we could say, hey, listen, we've learned that Michael always behaves this way. He logs in at 8 a.m. He logs out at 10. This is all the ports and protocols he uses and the data transfer amounts and everything in between. So just enforce that. And anything that any kind of attacker or adversary that's going after Michael will just be stopped along the ways for anything that doesn't belong there, right? But again, I don't feel like there's going to be a single approach that is entirely foolproof. I absolutely believe, and I see the value in having a proper layered approach. I think, there are certain safeguards you have to put all across the place to stop attackers at different points in time. But I do feel like, the technology used, there's more we can lean on that front, right? I feel like, especially from an email perspective, we're going to just talk a little bit about email. I find, some of these emails that come through, sure, they're convincing, but there's got to be a better way. Like, it's just, there's way too much coming through way too often, and there just has to be a better way. And for the longest time, I think, a lot of these vendors, and I say this all the time, cloud vendors and cloud businesses are concerned with what's most profitable to them, right? They want to get you sticky in their platform. They want to get you using all the, as a service code and machine learning and this software and that software. And they want to get you absolutely hooked because that's what gets them the most money. Security is kind of one of those peripheries where they've become better and better over the years with kind of acknowledging some of these challenges. But I really think a lot still remains to be desired in terms of kind of having better controls and better tools that can actually do a more effective job.
Okay, excellent. So with the time remaining in this session, I don't want to go in examples about data breaches and who was in the news a couple of months back or a couple of weeks back or whatever the case, but you as leaders in the security domain, and I will start with Sandra, What have you learned from the recent data breaches that happened on a SaaS provider? And I know sometimes you read something and you say, oh, this is a learning curve for me. I should take care of those aspects. So from your experience, what has you learned from the recent attacks, I would say, or the data breaches?
I think that they're human. You know, it goes back to the human element of everything that we do. When you talk about somebody committing their credentials to Git, you know, there's so many breaches that happen because of things like that. You know, if, you know, there's a lot of ransomware that's going around. Those are some of the most recent, but it's also teaching our developers how to develop, how to store our code securely, and how not to put credentials into, you know, places like Git. You know, those are some of the critical things, as well as scanning for them. You know, I don't think we spend enough time from a development perspective educating how to code securely, number one, and how to store and protect the code and the information.
Okay.
Those are critical.
Awesome.
Yeah. Besides ransomware, that's where you're getting the breaches. And also, you know, people are testing out technology. It's less when you start moving to a cloud, but you still have some infrastructure. You know, people are testing out things, and you leave them on the internet and don't change, you know, default passwords. You know, that's still a true vector.
Yep.
And you know, securing our applications is critical as well. And teaching about multi-factor, what to expect, what not to expect.
All are valid points, very valid points, actually. Michael.
Yeah. So I'm going to anecdotally a recent assessment that we had to do on one of our SaaS providers. We went in, did the overall assessment from their infrastructure VPN tunnel into the AWS instance with their small. They only had 7 servers in AWS, small. Okay, everything that they did there was appropriate and correct. And then we stepped out, and all 7 servers had open public RDP access. Okay. And 2 of the 7 still had their default admin credentials. So, you know, didn't matter all of the protection that they put on the inside to make sure that the infrastructure was appropriate, because they had left these giant public holes open. You know, it's Sandra was saying about you know, doing the scanning. So a lot of companies will stand up an infrastructure, and then they've got all the tooling and all the pre-work that they did sitting in an open S3 bucket, you know, that they forget to take down, or they forget to secure. And so everything that they did in their, you know, EC2 instances are okay, but they've got this set of documentation and files and everything sitting open.
Good. Nabil, anything to add to this question before we move to our Q&A time?
I think kind of looking at some of the really big cloud and SaaS kind of breaches we've seen over the last few years, one thing that's become kind of a bit of a trend that I see is a lot of times these breaches, they're really holistic in nature, where like if you actually read the incident reports, it's not that there was only one singular mistake and everything else was done perfectly that kind of caused the report to come out. There was a trail of error after error after error after error. And I think, you know, to Sandra's point, you know, there's absolutely a human element to it. But I feel like, you know, the interconnectedness of a business's software and applications that they use is something that has immense value in terms of being able to take a holistic approach to, right? Understanding, you know, who's logging in through IAM to which applications, and how do they interact with their email, and how does that touch and affect any infrastructure I have up in place. And the actual interaction amongst all those things is incredibly valuable, because for the longest time, you know, it's a bit of the same that we used to see all the time: siloed security tools, a boatload of, you know, active integration work that needs to happen to make some sense of everything that they're throwing at you, right? And ultimately, it's a bit of a losing battle if you look at kind of resources spent and time and money and all the rest. And I feel like, you know, with cloud and SaaS, it's a bit of the same thing, but just now we are able to integrate these things much cleaner, much better, much faster, because it is all code, right? And it's all APIs and it's all JSON files, and it's much simpler to actually hook these things together and have them kind of talk to each other and have a more of a holistic understanding, you know, as we normally would. So I think that's the one piece that kind of really sticks out to me.
Okay, good. Anything you guys want to add, any of you, before we go to Q&A? I think I have a couple of questions from our audiences. Okay.
Yep.
Michael.
So one of the things that I usually lead when I'm having conversations with prospective clients are the facility of scanning and understanding your own infrastructure security, you know, and spending the time and money on that, because if you don't, there's 100,000 other hackers out there that will, and they'll do it for free. Yep. They just won't give you the reports.
Definitely nothing for free, man. You get what you pay for. So we can, I think, we opened the platform for questions from the audience, and I think I have many scrolling in front of me. I can ask the question, and any of you guys can take a stab in that one. The first question actually says, machines responding autonomously drive bigger impact than a human response. However, small to medium businesses cannot afford high-end software and compute. Business cannot also afford being as a service in the cloud. What is your advice for companies as SMPs who are more vulnerable for attacks compared to a large scale businesses? Any advice for SMPs so they can be secure, not being like the big banks, the big insurance companies? They have tons of money to spend on security. But I think the question is how we can make small businesses secure without spending too much money from a security perspective.
Right.
I mean, I'll start. I think, you know, if you do the top 20 controls for a small business and you cover those off, you're in pretty darn good shape. Mm-hmm. Even if you compare it to larger businesses, you know, not all of them have the 20 top controls done. So it's not necessarily about spending all of the money. It's making sure that you have the policies, the processes, the procedures, utilize the tool sets that are available. Because a lot of times people don't actually use those tool sets. Use complex passwords. Use multi-factor.
All of the SaaS providers today, so from Office 365, SAP, Salesforce, they have security health checks built into their consoles. And, you know, yes, it takes a little bit of training and research to understand them, but they are free tools that will help you do a security health check and understand what your posture is.
Just take some time.
Yeah.
So sorry, just Sandra, to your point, I think there's also, you know, one of the best kind of security investments I find is kind of having a really good culture around, you know, security. And that culture is something that doesn't cost much money, if at all. Yeah. And I know I've done, you know, I've met with a multitude of small and medium businesses where some of the most kind of secure and clean networks I've ever seen have been small, super agile companies, but they have a strong sense of security culture where they understand the value of not having just free guest Wi-Fi that everybody connects to and does whatever they want on their machines, right? And again, that kind of culture can be instilled, you know, with the right mindset and the right kind of people and pieces around it, with no necessary need per se for technology to do that for you.
Good. I agree with that 100%. Another question, and I think that the person is actually really looking for an answer because he wrote it like 20 times. The question is, how closely is lack of control related to a lack of responsibility? Meaning people don't think that they are responsible to secure the environment. I'm a developer, I write a code, I don't care about security. I'm a person in infrastructure, I build the server, I don't care about security. It's not my responsibility. So are we in a place where vertically we have security people for security, infrastructure people for infrastructure, coders, developers, or this is security is a common responsibility between the teams.
It comes back to what Nabil said. It's having a community, and it's a shared responsibility. You don't just have security silos. My view has always been it's a joint, it's a shared responsibility. Security should not be gatekeepers. Security should be part of the entire process, but they aren't the gatekeepers. It's about, and I keep going back to it, raising the consciousness level. Everybody has a stake in it. And if you don't educate, you don't train, and really, you can do a bottom-up approach, you can do a top-down approach. Top-down actually works better than bottom-up, but you need the grassroots as well. And everybody needs to understand the part that they play, because it's an orchestra, and you need a conductor to conduct it for everybody to work in harmony together and to secure things. Because otherwise, they're going to be the weakest link, and it's a problem. Yeah. And you see it over and over again.
I've looked over a number of corporate, employee handbooks, so the code of conduct and whatever, and it's more and more prevalent that in the employee handbook they say security is your responsibility. That you are part of the solution. And
having the corporate policies helps.
Yeah. And I think, Sandra, just to, I guess, directly squash that question, I think a lack of control does not mean a lack of responsibility at all.
No.
And I think, oftentimes people might conflate the two, but it couldn't be further from the truth, right?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it all will go, again, we can start very briefly to speak about security, but at the end of the day, you want to have policies in place, you want to have a process in place, you want to have technology in place, so you can allow the people to implement those security controls. Like, you cannot just buy technology. Like the easiest way for people to go and say, spend this much money, buy this much tools, but without a policy within those tools, without a process within those tools, you will never be secure. And we learned our lesson. As you said, somebody put something on the net, within 20 seconds get breached because their keys is part of their code. So you cannot sometimes just go with one aspect of process, technology, people. You want to have all of them working together to implement what you want to implement at the end of the day. Any last thoughts from you guys around the table? Quick in 30 seconds, quick and dirty, we will call it.
Thank you for this, Samar. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the time. I learned a lot from my side, and I'm sure our audience also did the same. So thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Michael. And then thank you, Nabil and Darktrace for sponsoring this session. And definitely we'll see you guys back again in any other sessions today. So thank you.
CyberX, thank you.